covering all the news from every dark corner of the universe. SliceofSciFi.com.
And greetings, everyone, to another Slice of Sci-Fi. I'm Michael R. Menengay.
I'm Ben Raggington.
I'm Megan Zier.
And I'm Sam Roberts. And we are super excited to have our virtual guest today in the studio. A man who I like to say wears many hats. He is an author, a producer, an actor, and even an athlete, and hopefully we'll talk about all of those hats. His website says he's a literary sleuth and world creator who dared to expose the true story of Wonderland in his novels The Looking-Glass Wars, Seeing Red, and Arch Enemy. Please welcome with us today Frank Beddor. Welcome aboard, Frank.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. I'm looking forward to it.
Not a problem. Interesting stuff. I think first, right off the bat, I think we need to actually talk about Looking-Glass Wars, because this is a novel that's been out for a while, but you're doing something new with it right now, and that's primarily why we're chatting with you today.
Well, you know, it's interesting because I wrote the trilogy of prose novels, and when I was in the UK, I was meeting with some middle school kids, and this boy put up his hand, and he said, "Hey, my favorite character in the first book is Hatter Madigan, the bodyguard, but you cut off the story. You told us the beginning and the end, but I need to know what happened in the middle." And I'm like, "Okay." He goes, "So I need you to go home and write a novel about that." And I was like, "Wow, you're pretty precocious and outrageous over here." And but I got on the plane, and I'm not kidding you, I started thinking about that comment, and I realized that character would make a great lead in a graphic novel, and I'd never written anything in that form before. And I came home and I wrote the first comic, and I was lucky to get Ben Temple-Smith to do the illustrations. And if you can believe it, the comic book was the first story that was told in the U.S. because I had been turned down so many times in the U.S. I had no publisher. And so I really started my story with this little 32-page Hatter comic book, and then the fans picked it up and realized there was a prose novel attached to it, and they bought so many copies on Amazon UK that I ended up becoming a bestseller over there. And then Penguin came back and said, "Well, we want to."
Of course.
Of course. That's the way it works. Show them where the money's at, and they're all at your door, right?
So,
wow.
So there's some 12-year-old out there that I owe my publishing career in the United States to, but he's never shown himself. So
wow.
Well, you make I'm very curious about Looking-Glass Wars. Now, there seems to be some sort of a literary history, a fascination with Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. A lot of people like to constantly revisit it, and I'm kind of curious. What was it about Alice in Wonderland that you think is so popular among other people to want to delve into it, give their own twist? And what was it about it that made you want to go and do the Looking-Glass Wars?
Well, I'll start with my motivation. When I was a young boy, it was my grandmother's favorite book, and her name was also Alice, and it was my mother's favorite book. And so they read it to me when I was like, they wanted me to read it, and I didn't want to read it. And turns out that I hated it. And my book was the revenge to do the kind of book a boy about Alice would like to read. So I'm sort of joking, but the truth is that when I was a kid, I read it and I didn't really get it, and I didn't enjoy it that much. And then later, as an adult, when I read it, I was really fascinated with the imagery, and it's just so interesting, all the interpretations over the decades, and every decade seems to inspire musicians or artists or now filmmakers to take the material and reimagine it. But usually they're reimagining it for whatever's going on in the zeitgeist of that that time, that decade. And so it's interesting to look back, in the 60s when all of the musicians were doing it. And then, in the 80s, there was a whole goth thing. And then in the 90s, it was a sexual the sexualization of it, and now it's the reimagining of fairy tales to make them more contemporary and to make them more accessible again. And basically, that was the whole notion behind works of art going into the public domain, so that they would be reinterpreted for a contemporary audience. So I think that artists see it as a very rich source. Whether it's Grimm's fairy tales or if it's Alice in Wonderland, they just there's a lot of room for interpretation. Mine happened to start with a visit to the British Museum, where I came across an exhibit of ancient cards, and there was these playing cards that had art that reminded me of Lewis Carroll's work, except they were dark and kind of twisted and had this whole goth vibe going. And I became fascinated to learn the origins of these cards, which led me to an antiquities dealer who told me a story that inspired my whole book series. So, mine came from a very particular situation, which was, this British Museum exhibit. And the gentleman who I found actually owned some of the cards. It was an incomplete deck of cards at the British Museum. He owned the remaining cards. And so I sat with him for a number of hours and then convinced him many years later to sell me some of the cards, which I take with me on school visits, and I tell the story behind the story of the Looking Glass Wars.
That's
Very
fantastic.
Cool. It is. That is amazing stuff.
I love that story. I'm really intrigued by the visual aspect that drew you to the cards that ended up with you at the story, because I was really struck by the art that is associated with your novels, and also obviously the graphic stuff. How much do you feel like, because sometimes authors don't have a lot of control over cover art and stuff that's associated with their books. Did you really have any input into that? Who does that? Because it's very striking and immediately makes me want to read them.
Well, that is so kind of you, and I so appreciate that, because most of the time, authors really have no say in, as you pointed out. But I have a background in the movie business, and I've worked with a lot of concept artists. So I had already commissioned these artists. For instance, Doug Chang, who did Star Wars, I called him up and I said, look, I'm writing this scene about these card soldiers, and I want them to be card soldiers that are flat, but they have to be aerial, then they land, and then they transform into these sort of metallic soldiers. And I'm really having a hard time describing them in the book. And so here's what I have, Doug. Here's my description. So I sent it to him, and he sent a drawing back, and I put it on my wall. And when I went to write the scene, I looked up at the drawing that he did with all this little notes about how it would work, and that's how I ended up describing it. So it was a real collaboration with the visual artists that I worked with. And so when it came time to choose the cover art, I just think that, it was already there and part of it, and I was using it to promote the books. And remember, Penguin came to the party late.
Yeah.
And because they came late, Random House was also interested, so I had this little bidding war. And one of the things that I, negotiated was the ability to, for them to use my artwork, in the cover and inside. They did a really interesting, in the paperback, they inserted art as if it was a movie, a book based, how they do that movie art.
Yeah.
So we just did concept art. And so I felt like it all helped. The world's so different now. The world's so visual, and all of these things are portals. These, a piece of art or a piece of a song or a graphic novel. There's so many ways to dive into storytelling, across these different mediums. And this was a number of years ago, and they weren't as convinced. Not as many people were doing it. I had a trailer, a special effects trailer.
Wow.
And so, I had done a lot of that stuff a long time ago. In 2006, my book came out in the States. And so I think they just threw up their arms and went, I don't know how we're going to stop this guy, so let's just get on board. and ride him and hope for the best.
That's the best place to be, though. Is keep them guessing. What are you going to come up with next? Because truly creative people that are that just this stuff flows from them. It's like you try to just direct them. You don't try to sit on them and tell them what they need to be doing. Just let them do their thing and ride the horse, so to speak.
It's really true. And in the movie business, what's happened in the movie business, it all really depends on the director. And when you're trying to sell a movie, they are going to make the decision. The director has to make every single choice. Who's hired, what the colors are, the costume, everything goes to the director. And they have to let go. And then they roll the dice and they hope the director puts on film what they're imagining the movie in their head.
Exactly.
And that's what I needed them to do with the marketing. I needed them to say, look at, let me just put it out there. And they did do that. And, I think we had a nice success with the books and the prose books.
Yeah.
But I wanted to take on the graphic novels and, have even more control, because I got a lot of feedback from readers who, like this kid in England, who said, "Hey man, where's my book about Hatter? He's my favorite character."
That's so fantastic. That is amazing. So, talk a little bit about the graphic novel. You have a new one coming out, right?
I do have a new one coming out. It's the fourth in a 5-book series. And to quickly let your listeners know, in the first prose book, my lead character Alice is celebrating her 7th birthday, and there's a violent coup, and her bodyguard Hatter Madigan tears her away from this birthday party. They jump into this thing called the Pool of Tears. The legend is it's a portal from Wonderland to our world, but no one ever comes back, hence the name. Well, when they're in the Pool of Tears, they're separated. Alice shoots out of a puddle, and she ends up in Oxford. And Hatter shoots out of a puddle and ends up in Paris. Well, in my novel, I tell the return when he comes back, but I don't tell any of the 13-year search. So the graphic novel is told from Hatter Madigan's point of view during his 13 years in our world searching for Alice. And there's a big twist. What's that?
That is awesome. So cool. We're all just geeking out here. It's like, oh my God, that is so cool.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. That is a brilliant idea.
Well, and what's really fun about it is that I discovered that Hatter had a long lost brother who he admired, and
I know,
he's
I love
going
that.
to meet his.
Well, your characters talk to you. That's the way it is. They absolutely
do.
do.
Talking to me, and then he said, my brother is like Cain and Abel, Frank. I'm like, dude, how bad does it get? He goes, dude, it gets really dark.
Ooh.
You got to start getting it out there. I'm like, all right. So this is it's a 5-book series that fills in from the first novel, those 13 years. And the first book was called Far From Wonder. The second book, Mad with Wonder. The fourth book, The Nature of Wonder. And this book is called The Zen of Wonder, because for the last 3 books, he's been on an external search for Alice. And on this trip, in this book, he goes on an internal path to find himself, to regain his footing, so he can continue on his journey to find Hatter, all the while meeting his brother, who is going to emerge in the last book, which is called The Love of Wonder. And both the love represents love and hate, and with his relationship with his brother, and of course the love of finding Alice, which everybody knows happened in the book. He finds Alice and returns her, but they don't know how he did it and what happened. And so that's where I'm at. And the Zen of Wonder is coming out in May, and I'm really proud of it. And we just did things like, for instance, there's no credits on the cover. There's just a Zen of Wonder, no names on the credit. There's no ads. It's just really as pure as I could make, as I could produce the book. My name is inside of the book with everybody, but it's really subtle, and yet it's exciting. And I have a couple of different great cover artists, and so I can't wait for it to get out there and see what people think of it.
So is that an extra challenge as a storyteller when you're telling a story where everybody knows basically what the ending is, right? They know that he finds Alice, so does that present a bigger challenge for telling a story?
Well, did you guys see Titanic?
Good point.
All right.
Good point.
I mean, you know what? You just have to be aware of it. And, I know they know that. I know. But I'm telling it from a couple things. I'm telling it from Hatter's point of view. And there's a lot going on that's different from Hatter's point of view. And then there's a whole new character. There's a number of characters. But the most important character, it's a brother story, which is new. That's not in my prose book. So he is not anywhere in the novel. He emerges. He comes out. He's in this medium, and he's a really interesting character and a mirror that Hatter has to look at and to measure himself and to test himself and to contemplate, the best path and right and wrong and all sorts of things. So, it is challenging if you don't have something to hang your hat on, but I now have something.
There's the hat again.
There's the hat thing, yeah.
Sorry.
That's
I'm
okay.
sorry.
I love it. You keep doing it.
Yeah, right? Where would you recommend people start? Would you
That's a
say
good
the
question.
prose books first, or is it okay to jump in with the graphic novels and you'll still get a kind of similar experience? Is there a recommended path?
I tried to design it so that you could do it either way. It's just your preference. Certainly people have read the graphic novels who maybe are into graphic novels, or in younger kids who are reluctant readers, and then they go and pick up the prose books.
Gateway,
Most of the time.
Very good.
Say that again?
Oh, it's very good.
Graphic novels like a gateway drugs to books.
Yes.
Exactly. I use them every day.
It's a gateway. Yeah, it's a gateway. So, and sometimes it's the opposite. I think because I've sold more prose novels by its very nature, that people pick up that and then they go, oh, I see. There's, graphic novels, and there's not as much exposure to graphic novels. I mean, my novels are, you can get them in airports. It's hard to find my prose books in an airport. So, I mean, it's hard to find my graphic novels in an airport.
Right.
Yeah. I see how you're.
So, and we understand you have a successful Kickstarter campaign around. Is it a new prose book?
Well, no, it was for the Zen of Wonder.
Oh,
so
okay.
I've been working on it for the last 3 years, and I was almost finished. I was right at the finish line, but I ran out of money to print it. So I was thinking, well, wow, I don't want to wait another 6 months. I have a movie at Sony that is a sci-fi thing that's about to start production. So and I can tell you about that in a minute. But,
We'd love to hear.
so
yeah.
I thought,
Yeah.
well, you know what? I'm going to do a Kickstarter campaign and see what happens. And I had a number of friends, Ben Templesmith and Paul Jenkins, who had done them. And so it was to raise the money for the printing of it. But then I find out that it's an amazing platform for, to bring in new readers and to get exposure and, to really touch base with, pre-existing fans. And so it's been tremendous. And I just did this video to thank everybody. And what I said in the video is, you don't understand how immediate this Kickstarter thing is compared to writing a novel. So you write a novel, and what do? You send it off to your publisher, and you go celebrate. But then your publisher sends you 26 pages of notes on, all the changes you have to, and then you shoot yourself. And then it's like published, and you go into a bookstore. I remember this so distinctly. I went into the first bookstore, and I was standing there as if something was going to happen. And nobody, I'm like pointing over there, young adults, see that book over there? Nobody even got close to the section. And I walked out and went, wow, this is going to be a long, long haul. And then I did my Kickstarter campaign, and I hit the 20,000, and I was like, wow. It happened. You guys made it happen, and it felt like doing theater. It was like immediate. I had applause in my own mind. Like I was really proud, and so my Kickstarter campaign has been successful. But I just also announced that I'm doing stretch goals, and I'm going to write a novel from Hatter's point of view of his 13 years. So the graphic novel will now have a novel.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And
cool.
it's going to be told in a third narrative structure. So
that's amazing.
I don't know.
Well, congratulations on that. I mean, hitting goal on Kickstarter is that's huge.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the fact that you actually got the support behind it. So, congratulations on that.
And you hit it fast, so
Thank
you'll probably
you.
hit your stretch goals too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hit it, and about half the time. So, like I said, I was just, deeply satisfying, and I really appreciate the people who pledged, because it made it feel, and that's why I got motivated. I was like, to start creating more. And also motivated because there's no gatekeepers. I can just, I can go right to the fans and initiate things. So it's empowering.
That's awesome. And now, one thing I kind of want to get off this topic just a little bit, because I really want to talk about this thing that you're doing with Nathan Fillion. It's it's an amazing I'll let you tell it. You're doing something with Nathan Fillion. Tell us all about that.
Well, Nathan Fillion and my partner PJ Harzma, we're partners in a game company. He's a fellow author, and they started a charity called Kids Need to Read. And PJ and I probably go to see 15,000 elementary or middle school kids a year. And we talk about writing, we talk about graphic novels, we talk about art, we talk about how you can make a living and you can tell stories in all kinds of different mediums. And he started this charity, which has become the number one charity for like Phoenix Comicon, and they give like 45,000 books a year to kids. And so Nathan and I decided that for every book that I sell on Kickstarter, or every book that I sell at any of the conventions, I will donate one book to Kids Need to Read.
Nice.
And that just seems logical and fair and a great way of of giving back and giving the Kickstarter and the monetary part of it a little bounce, because we get to give.
That's awesome. It really is. That's really awesome. I applaud you for that. Anything that you can do to get kids involved, get them reading again, and
to expand public school libraries,
Yes.
which is awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
Absolutely.
and one of the problems is graphic novels are so expensive. They don't have a scholastic for public schools, and so to give graphic novels, which are $14.95 or something like that, for paperbacks, it's a great way. And a lot of those kids are reluctant readers. A lot of those kids, need and want something visual, and most of them are boys. And my Hatter stories are really aimed towards boys and have cool gadgets and his hat and his backpack and things. So the Denise who runs Kids Needs to Read just says, look, we give these things away like crazy. This is like our number one book for public school. So anything you can do. So it's really satisfying. So that's what I'm doing.
Fantastic.
So, and we're excited that it's you're going to be at Phoenix Comicon, because we're based in Phoenix. So
Fantastic.
Yes,
We will see you.
We'll be coming down there to see and to maybe help out by buying some stuff.
That would be fun. Oh, that would be great. Well, I'd love to see you and meet you guys. So please do come down. I'll definitely be there. I've been going there since Mesa, that little.
Yeah.
I think I was there the second year, so I haven't started from the beginning.
Oh, it is.
It's
grown
grown.
so much.
Oh, it's huge.
It's
nuts.
great event. All right,
There's so many. Let me just say something about
Yeah.
this, because there's so many great readers in Phoenix. I've been going there because people really take to reading, and I don't know what it is. It's too much sun, or too much heat, or too much desert.
It's true. We got to stay inside.
There's a lot of reading going on in Phoenix, so I appreciate the con.
That's awesome.
Very much so.
We just have a few minutes left, but you want to talk about the film you're fixing to work on?
Yeah, it's called The Juliet, based on Fondly Fahrenheit, I think.
Yeah, if you know Alfred Bester, he was a science fiction contemporary of Philip K. Dick, and there's a little bit of a funny story to this, because I have been working on trying to make this into a movie for 16 years.
Yikes.
Wow.
And I finally set it up at Sony, and we hired Rupert Sanders. It's a sci-fi Lovers in the Run, but it's got two amazing characters. And Rupert Sanders, who did Snow White and the Huntsman, is his favorite genre is science fiction. So, which I didn't know until I met him and we started talking about this story. So, if I'm lucky, our writers will deliver this rewrite that Rupert has in mind, and we will start pre-production shortly. So I'll probably know in the next 30 days. But the funny part of the story is that 16 years ago, I was desperate to option this little short story, which is only 30-some-odd pages, and I could not find any of the agents or anybody. It took me a year, and I finally tracked down his editor. And his editor said to me, "Oh, you need to call Joe." I said, "Joe who?" "Joe Suter." I said, "Who's Joe Suter?" "It's Alfred Bester's bartender."
Wow.
I went, okay. So I called Joe in the middle of work. He was at the bar, and I said, "Is this Joe Suter?" And there's noise in the background, drinks clink. He goes, "Yep." And I said, "Hey, do you know Alfred Bester?" And he goes, "Alfie, I sure do." And then I said, "Is it true that when he died, he left his entire literary estate to you?" And he goes, "It sure is." I go, "I want to buy a book from you."
That's
and
awesome.
so I bought this short story from his bartender, whose bar was called Jumpin' Joe's.
Cute.
Oh, that is a great story. You got a lot of
Wow.
great stories.
You really do. You have to come back and see us again really
Yeah.
soon, because especially when you're
Anytime.
out of Comicon, you'll have to come in. But
We'll have to
Well, yeah,
ambush
I'll
you
come
with
in.
some
it's
cameras.
been awesome to have you on the show today, I tell you.
Yeah, folks, go check it out. Any one of the Looking Glass Wars. Start with the prose books or the graphic novels. They look fantastic.
Absolutely.
And go to my Kickstarter and help me get to that stretch goal
goals.
so I can write that next novel. I would really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Well, that's going to do it for this show. Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much, Frank, for being with us today.
Completely my pleasure. Thank you, guys.
All right, and we'll have more Slice of Sci-Fi coming up really soon. Just keep watching the inner tubes. We're there. All right, everyone. Bye.